HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Dog Who Bit a Policeman by Stuart M. Kaminsky, read by John Mclain.
Prologue. Marseille, France. "Les chiens, dogs," said the oldest man sitting at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. He shook his head. The three men had the rugged, weather-worn faces of fishermen, mountain climbers, or laborers. They were none of these, and had never been. In spite of the fact that one of the men was half black, it was clear that the three were related. One man, the youngest, who was at least 45 years old, wore a blue turtleneck shirt under an unbuttoned black sport jacket. The other men were old. The half-black man was about 70. The third man, who had said dogs in a voice of uncertainty, was close to 80. The two old men wore white polo shirts under sport jackets. All three men were lean. All three were armed, making no effort to hide the holsters and weapons under their jackets. Noise filled the room. Smoke filled the room. The people who filled the room laughed, talked, drank. Everyone, fishermen, shopkeepers, petty criminals, drug dealers, pimps and prostitutes, was careful not to look at the three men who sat talking, eating shrimp, and drinking wine. These were special men, dangerous and dour men known to the underbelly of Marseille. The waiter, who had known and served them for more than 2 decades, approached them cautiously, said nothing, and brought them whatever they ordered. The oldest man always ordered and said, "Bring whatever is fresh." He didn't bother to order wine or after the main course shrimp or squid. And the waiter had done as he had been told, and as he had not needed to be told. He filled the wine glasses when they were empty and retreated quickly after he had done so. "You're certain about the money?" asked the half-black man. "If we can take over independent operations in Moscow, Bombay, Osaka, New Orleans, Hamburg, Buenos Aires, and Cairo," the youngest man said, "we will be insured of an initial income of 30 million a year." "Francs?" asked the oldest man. "American dollars," said the youngest man, "and we can expand. Take over or start operations in Taiwan, Sydney, Singapore. It is almost limitless. This could mean more than the drug income, the protection business, almost limitless." The oldest man drank his wine and shook his head, still not convinced. "And we must go to Moscow?" asked the half-black man. "We must start there," said the youngest man. "It is well organized, and the young lunatic who has taken over has ambitions much like ours. We absorb him or eliminate him. We meet with him, see his operation, judge him. If we don't like him or what we see, we deal with it." Silence at the table while the three men ate and thought. A man across the room laughed loudly. It was too hearty a laugh to be natural. "He's crazy, this Russian?" asked the half-black man. "Mon oncle, you will judge for yourself." "When?" asked the oldest man. "Immediately," said the youngest man. "Tomorrow or the next day. The sooner we act, the less trouble we are likely to have." "We take our own men?" asked the half-black man. "Yes," said the youngest man. The oldest man finished his glass of wine, and the waiter appeared instantly to refill the glass, and then moved quickly away, where he could watch and be ready to serve the needs of the three men without hearing any of their conversation. Since the men had killed his father a quarter of a century ago, cut him open and thrown him into the sea, the waiter might not be blamed if he poisoned the trio. But he had only once considered such an action. Years earlier, when he had thought about such an act of retribution, his bowels had given way, and he had sat in his small room shaking for most of the day. Through the window of his room that looked out at the ocean, He had considered what might happen to him whether he succeeded or failed in such an enterprise. No, he would never act, just as he had gradually realized that he would never marry, never have a family beyond his sister and her children in La Chapelle. He had little to lose but his life, should he decide to kill the man, but his life was still precious. They, or their survivors, might simply, or complexly, mutilate the waiter. He had heard tales. No, fear had kept him from action, and now it was far too late. Besides, the three gangsters tipped very well, and the waiter had a reputation because of his almost nightly service to the three men and others they occasionally brought with them. The three men were talking business. The waiter could tell by the slightest signs of animation on their craggy faces.
"Très bien,"
said the oldest man finally.
"We go to Moscow."
Chapter 1. The young man and woman sat eating porterhouse steaks at a table in the restaurant of the Radisson Slavyanskaya Hotel and Business Center at Berezhkovskaya, Naberezhnaya 2. The restaurant's meat was reputed to be the best in Moscow. The hotel, on the other hand, though it had once been the most popular in the city, had been quickly overtaken and passed in size, quality, and service by more than a dozen new capitalist hotels within walking distance of the Radisson. Originally, the hotel had been one of the many Soviet in-tourist tombs of dark rooms and darker hallways. For about 2 years, it had been the headquarters for business travelers. Americans still accounted for a large number of its guests. Indeed, President Clinton had stayed here on one visit, eating the famous meat and watching CNN in his room with his shoes off. Gradually, the hotel had become a hangout for members of the various mafias. The coffee shop, in fact, was a meeting place for Moscow's hitmen, or killery, who argued, drank, ate, and bragged to impress each other and the women who hung on their every word. The coffee shop was known as Café Killer to those who knew its reputation, which was much of the population of Moscow. This young man who sat in the restaurant eating steak with his companion was dressed in designer clothes from Italy. His hair was brushed back. His face, though young, resonated with experience. He drank, ate, looked around, and minded his own business. The woman was pretty, slightly plump, and dressed in an expensive green Parisian frock. The two talked quietly, neither smiling nor seeming to savor the expensive food brought to their table. There were others watching the two. Since they were new to the restaurant, the regulars naturally wondered who the newcomers were, and whether they were tourists or potential regulars. The regulars were curious, but they minded their business. Two of those examining the pair were Ilya Skoteshkov and Boris Osipov, who had already discovered that the young man and woman were registered in the hotel, that they were Ukrainian, that his name was Dmitry Kolk, and hers Luba Polikarpova, and that he had asked a bellboy, whom he had slipped a $20 American bill, if he knew who he might contact about attending a dogfight. Packs of hungry dogs roamed Moscow. They had been pets, or attempts at protection from the soaring rate of personal crimes in the city. Most of the dogs were Rottweilers, which cost as much as $500 American. Licensing was optional. Many of the dogs had been released by owners who could no longer feed themselves adequately, and certainly could not afford to feed a dog. They had been replaced by guns. Russians can own rifles, shotguns, and tear gas pistols, and the number of registered weapons in Moscow, whose population hovers at 9 million, was over 300,000. Adding in the non-registered weapons, the police estimated that there was one gun for every 3 Moscow residents, including babies and babushkas. So, the dogs had formed into packs that came out at night, scavenging, attacking lone dogs, and ever more frequently, humans. Recently, the packs had started to emerge during daylight hours. Food was scarce. Almost 40,000 dog attacks had been reported by Muscovites over the past year. 2/3 of those had resulted in hospitalization of the victim. Crews of uniformed policemen had begun combing the streets and dark corners of the city, shooting strays. 5 policemen had been among those hospitalized with bites. One of the policemen had lost an eye. Another had lost the use of his left arm. It was inevitable that enterprising criminals would find a way to reap profits from the wild dogs. First, some small-time dealers in stolen goods had captured the fiercest of the wild dogs and had organized dogfights, fights to the death in garages where men stood betting, shouting, smoking, and drinking from bottles sold them by their hosts. The enterprise was an immediate success. The newly rich government bureaucrats and a rabid assortment of bored tourists and Muscovites came to the illegal fights and wagered huge sums. It was only a matter of time before the Mafias took an interest in the dogfights. The Armenian Mafia took over the original enterprise after persuading the 4 leading arrangers of such fights to sell out for a very reasonable price. One of the enterprising promoters had required a square carved in his back before becoming reasonable. The Armenians, in turn, had made a quick profit in weapons by selling out to a group of Muscovites reported to be heavily financed by international investors. Now, the dogfights were turning into big dollars in the early morning hours of darkness. Now, there were private arenas, some with padded seats. Now, one could win or lose thousands of American dollars, or millions of rubles. The bellhop had told the young man in the silk suit that he would see what he could do. Dmitri Kolk had nodded, saying, "Tonight, if possible." The bellboy had told the bell captain, who had told a contact he knew was into illegal dogfights, and the contact had gone to Ilya and Boris. The restaurant was a bustle with hurrying waiters, table hoppers, and busboys. Dmitri Kolk sat passively looking around the room. He made no eye contact and drank slowly. Ilya called a waiter, who came immediately to the table. "That man," Ilya said, looking at Dmitri. "Give him this address and tell him to be there at midnight to get what he is looking for." Ilya wrote an address on a napkin with a felt-tip pen and handed it to the waiter, who immediately took it to Dmitri Kolk, who listened, glanced at the napkin, and tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. Kolk did not look around to see who might be watching him. Sasha Tkach and Elena Timofeyeva had been assigned to track down those who were running the illegal fights. This was not considered a choice assignment, and neither of the 2 deputy inspectors from the Office of Special Investigation had any idea of why the Yak, Director Igor Yakovlev, had taken on the dogfight problem. There had to be some political gain to be had, but neither officer could come up with an idea of what that gain might be. They had dutifully taken on the identities of Kolk and Luba, and for several days Sasha had enjoyed the rich life and the $400 a night room. Elena would have preferred her own identity. Sasha was just past 30, but looked at least 5 years younger. In spite of his growing problems with his wife Maya, and the prison-like condition of living in a tiny 2-room apartment with 2 children. Making the situation worse was the neurotic intrusion of his mother, Lydia, who appeared whenever she wished, shouted her directives for proper living and child-rearing, and was constantly on the verge of battle with Maya. Younger men were being promoted ahead of Sasha, who was considered part of the old guard, in spite of his age. Sasha was seldom in a good mood, but he was feeling rather content tonight. Elena, on the other hand, was a few years older than Sasha. She was being pursued by Yosef Rostnikov, Inspector Rostnikov's son, who had recently joined the Office of Special Investigation. Yosef was smart, handsome, and, in spite of being considered Jewish, looking toward a promising future. Yosef had proposed marriage to Elena 3 times in the last few months. She had turned him down each time. She had a career and ambition, and she did not want to come home each night to anything but the emotions she had earned during the day. Still, Yosef was wearing her down, which was not entirely an unpleasant experience. When they got the assignment from Chief Inspector Porfiry Petrovich Rostnikov, with a warning to be especially careful, Sasha had told Maya that he would be away for several days on a dangerous assignment. Maya didn't look convinced, but she accepted the situation after getting a call from Porfiry Petrovich telling her that, indeed, her husband had been selected by Yakovlev himself for the job, a job he was not at liberty to discuss. Elena, on the other hand, had had little trouble after telling her Aunt Anna that she would be away on assignment for a while. Elena lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment with her aunt, who'd been a state procurator until a series of heart attacks had sent her into retirement. Recently, Anna and her niece had been finding it difficult to make ends meet. Anna's pension money had not come in for months, and Elena's salary, not particularly high, had arrived later and later each month. The 2 women had lived increasingly on Anna's small savings. It was the Yak's idea that Sasha and Elena engage in this role-playing. It was the Yak who had arranged for Sasha to have both a pocket full of American dollars and 2 credit cards in the name of Dmitry Kolk. The investment seemed out of proportion to the crime, but the Yak was not to be questioned. Besides, Sasha thought it was a respite, a small, if possibly dangerous vacation, with enormous benefits. "How do I look?" Sasha asked Elena when they were back in the hotel room and he had changed clothes. Elena examined him. Sasha had daubed more hair cream into his hair and combed it straight back. He had changed out of his designer suit and was now wearing gray slacks, a blue button-down shirt, and a gray silk zipper jacket.
"Fine," she said. "You saw the dog?"
"A pit bull," he said. "Kennel has several of them. This one is supposedly particularly mean, but he looked quite benign to me. I hate dogs. My aunt had a dog. He growled and snapped at me and my cousins. Twice he bit me. I dreaded visiting my aunt. When the dog, Osip, died, my cousins and I celebrated. This pit bull is named Tchaikovsky. He was shipped to Kiev and then shipped here to me. He's in a private, very expensive kennel. You should have come to see him."
"I prefer cats,"
said Elena, more than a bit irked, but not showing it. She had never been offered the opportunity to examine the animal upon whose performance their safety and the success of their assignment depended.
"It's almost midnight."
Sasha nodded, adjusted his shirt and sleeves, and checked his hair with the palm of his right hand. "I'd better hurry," he said.
"I still think I should go with you," she said.
"The invitation was for me," he said.
"I can follow, watch," she said.
"Unnecessarily dangerous," he said.
"You look pleased. You've looked pleased about this whole assignment."
"Perhaps a little," he said.
"You're not curious about why so much money is being spent to put on a front for us? Hotel, clothes, shipping a dog to Kiev and back? Bets you'll have to make?" she asked.
"No," he said. "That is the concern of Director Yakovlev."
"Be careful," she said.
"Of course," he said, checking himself again in the mirror. Elena wasn't so sure. "You have the address where they told me to come," he said, adjusting his hair. "If I'm not back by morning—"
"Then I'll know you are really enjoying yourself," she said.
The naked, rather hairy body of a large man floated face down in the Moscow River. His massive buttocks rose and bobbed like two pale balloons. The body was corpse-white and bore a tattoo on the left arm which, like the right, drifted outward from the dead man. The tattoo, Rostnikov could see from the police boat, was of a knife with a snake twisted around the blade and handle. "Shall we pull him out?" asked a uniformed officer. "No, not yet," said Rostnikov. "We'll wait. You have coffee?" The uniformed officer, a very young man with a cap that looked a bit large for his narrow face, said yes. "Please," said Rostnikov, sitting on the wooden seat at the rear of the boat. "What is your name?" "Igor Druznin." "Bring a cup for yourself, too, Igor Druznin," said Rostnikov. "We can talk while we wait." The young officer left. An excursion boat, filled no doubt with tourists, chugged past. One or two people on board saw the body and began to take pictures. Others joined them. In English, one of the tourists said, "Can't we get a little closer?" The boat cruised on down the river. Once, the river had been relatively clean, a wide, dark, flowing, meandering path which Muscovites liked to watch from the banks while fishing, eating lunch, or simply thinking. But that was gradually changing. There had always been those who, under cover of night, dumped their garbage in the dark water. Now, though such dumping was illegal, it had grown less covert. And garbage was only part of the problem. Far north, factories poured liquid waste into the river. Much of it was filtered out by natural processes. Much of it was not. "Others do it, so I do it too," was the often spoken excuse of those who live near enough to the river to defile it. It had grown worse with the fall of the Soviet Union and the chaos that had overrun the city. The police, in the days before the new democracy, would from time to time arrest people who spread filth in the waters. Now, no one seemed to care. There were those who said the river had taken on a new and not pleasant smell. "It has the stink of freedom," Lydia Tkach had said. Porfiry Petrovich Rostnikov was the senior investigator in the Office of Special Investigation. This office had been started as a dumping ground for politically touchy cases, and cases the MVD, and even State Security, the old KGB, wanted no part of, because they promised nothing but failure and a threat to those who might pursue them. Rostnikov and his staff had been brought to the Office of Special Investigation by the pompous Colonel Snitkinoy, the Grey Wolfhound, who was considered a fine figure of a fool on whom could be dumped disastrous cases without the possibility of furthering his ambition. They had been wrong. When Rostnikov had been transferred from the Moscow procurator's office after one confrontation too many with people in power, the KGB and the chief procurator himself, he had taken with him his small staff. The sensitive crimes that others had imposed upon the Wolfhound and his staff began to be brought to conclusions, and at one point the Office of Special Investigation had even stopped an attempted assassination of Mikhail Gorbachev, who was then president of the Soviet Union. There were those later who said that it would have been better had Rostnikov failed, but at the time it had brought grudging respect for Snitkinoy and his men. So successful was the office that the Grey Wolfhound was transferred and promoted to head the security service at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. He was a perfect choice in his neat, bemedaled uniform, a relic standing tall with flowing silver hair, an exhibit worthy of placement next to a Rublev icon. The Office of Special Investigation had recently been taken over by Igor Yakovlev. The Yak was about 50, lean, with hair cut short, and the bushiest eyebrows Porfiry Petrovich had ever seen, with the possible exception of Leonid Brezhnev. The Yak, a former KGB officer, was given to dark, uneventful suits and suspenders. his hair was receding, and his glasses had thick lenses. He was ambitious, Rostnikov knew, and was using the office to further that ambition. Information gathered in the course of investigations could, and well might, be used by the yak to put pressure on those above him, or traded to them to aid his ascension up the ladder of political power. But to give the man his due, Yakovlev had promoted Rostnikov, given him a free hand, and pledged his support if one or more of the varied criminal organizations and the confused state bureaucracy attempted to impede the performance of his duties. Up to now, the yak had been as good as his word, and had successfully bought the loyalty of Rostnikov and his staff. The wake of the passing excursion boat, now about a half-mile down the river, had lifted the corpse and set his right hand moving in what looked like a wave to a school of small fish below him. The boat was on the northern bank of the meandering river, directly across from the Hotel Baltshug Kempinski, Moscow. An elegant hotel built in 1898 and reopened in 1992 after a complete renovation by a German-Russian group. The hotel boasted 234 luxury rooms. Rostnikov knew that on the other side of the hotel was St. Basil's Cathedral, Red Square, and the Kremlin. Rostnikov shifted his weight as the young uniformed officer came back on deck and offered the detective a blue mug. Officer Druznin had a gray cup. Rostnikov took the cup, thanked the man who looked out at the corpse, and began to drink. The coffee was tepid and awful, but it was coffee. As he drank, the two men watched the naked corpse. "Are you married, Igor?"
Yes.
"Children?"
Not yet.
"You want children?"
Yes, but we can't afford even to feed ourselves. I haven't been paid for 2 months. Fortunately, my wife works. She sells papers and sweets at the Kazan train station.
Rostnikov could never quite get comfortable. He was a man of average size, but built like the German tank that had crippled his left leg when he was a boy soldier. For almost half a century, Rostnikov had dragged the leg painfully, had listened to its complaints like those of an aged parent for whom one is responsible. Then, one day, the pain had gotten worse, and a doctor he trusted, his wife Sarah's cousin, Leon Moiseyevich, had told him that the leg should go. Rostnikov had agreed with regret, and now he had a prosthesis that allowed him to walk almost normally. Rostnikov missed his withered leg and knew that Palinin, the half-mad scientific technician whose laboratory was 2 levels below the Petrovka police headquarters, had kept that leg somewhere among the hundreds of specimens that cluttered his laboratory. Rostnikov had sent for Palinin. Palinin would certainly grumble and complain. He didn't like leaving his laboratory. If there was a corpse to be examined, he wanted it brought to him. If there was evidence to be pieced together, Palinin wanted it laid out at his convenience among the retorts, burners, and tools, many of which were his own inventions. Rostnikov, from the time he was a boy, had been an avid lifter of weights. He kept a set of barbells and a bench at home, and from time to time entered park and district competitions, which he invariably won. Now that he was placed in the senior bracket of such competition, he won even more regularly, and thus competed less. "How did you get here, huh?" asked Rostnikov.
Well, my father...
"No, Igor. I was talking to our floating friend."
He is dead,"
said the young officer.
"If not, we are witnessing a miracle,"
said Rostnikov. "I was told once by an Inuit shaman in Siberia that it is a comfort to the souls of the dead to talk to them before they are taken by the spirits."
"You believe that?"
asked Druznin.
"I'm sorry. It's not my business to question."
"No, that is fine," said Rostnikov, taking another sip of the coffee. "I don't believe either, but I find it helpful to speak to the dead even if they do not answer." If the Hindus are correct, our floating friend does...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?